Before we start the book of love, just once more, since we have touched this point of specialized forms of yoga and Sri Aurobindo's yoga, why Sri Aurobindo did not give a very particular fixed technique for everyone. One, of course, human natures are different. Secondly, and more importantly, because he is not happy with just giving us a taste of some exceptional experience. So when we take a specialized form of practice, it leads us to certain exceptional states of consciousness. And while it is very nice, because one suddenly feels something very nice, beautiful, blissful, very high, and of course, at its height, it is a reflection of the self, the true self. But it doesn't transform life. Inner experiences don't transform life. They are like riches and jewels. One discovers. It's like discovering that, oh, I have some diamonds. My dad had left a little chest and I had never opened it. There are some diamonds. But I don't know what use I can put it to. Because everywhere there is poverty. If I take it and try to exchange it in the market, people don't even know whether it's a diamond or not and whether it can really be exchanged or not. So inner experiences only color the consciousness. They don't transform it. This is something Sri Aurobindo has very clearly said. Second, yoga and spirituality is not about achieving an exceptional state of consciousness, but of transforming the consciousness, change of consciousness. So exceptional state during some particular practices, trance states, etc. This is not what yoga is about. And that's why this yoga proceeds along many lines simultaneously, even when we are not practicing yoga seemingly, and yet through the journey of life, once we are open to Mother, she takes us through this path of yoga. What is needed is suppleness. Again, this thing about this, of course, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have said several places, but one small little, very beautiful anecdote I remember. Mother has written this, spoken this, and she says that when I came to India and I met Sri Aurobindo, he was telling me about his childhood. I was just contemplating how beautiful it must have been, Sri Aurobindo telling Mother about his childhood. So, anyways, he says he was telling me about his childhood, and then I remarked, I don't have any exceptional capacity in me. I am so mediocre, so average. Just imagine somebody who has been with Rodin and who's painting, music, art, all this, who had read all these philosophies, translated, realized these things, tells Sri Aurobindo, I am very mediocre and average. I don't know why. When I read it, I felt very comforted actually. That's why I'm sharing it. But also the truth behind it. That then she says, Sri Aurobindo told me, no, it is very good. That is how it should be. There is a particular reason why it is like that. So Mother says, that time I thought it's just like comforting a child. So he's telling me, he doesn't want to tell me that, oh, you are average. He said, it's very good, it must be to comfort me like a child. But as I grew, I understood. And then he told me, it is because what is needed in this yoga is suppleness. And if one is specialized in something, specialization means the thought and nature is fixed along a certain groove. And we look at everything from that groove. And therefore, if we even have a specialized line of approach towards the divine, a specialized form of experience, an exceptional state of consciousness, we look at everything from that groove. And in the bargain, we lack suppleness. And in the bargain, we lose the truth of infinity, which cannot be contained in any, even the most exceptional state. That's why she says, oh, an inconceivable splendor, unthinkable, nameless, soul reality. So therefore, it is good if we are average and mediocre. It's a very good thing, good sign. It's so heartening. But the truth is here about the yoga that it's not about experiencing certain exceptional states, but somebody who is supple, open, ready to surrender, not about the capacity to enter into some kind of a special trance and experience some things. So, time and again, Mother and Sri Aurobindo has spoken about this. And here in the quest, we have seen that if one is satisfied with these halfway homes of the spirit, then obviously one is not yet ready for the infinite. In Mother's story of the play of the ascent to truth, this is what she reveals. That even the ascetic, he reaches a point and he is happy that I have found. But then beyond it, these few sadhaks and sadhikas go, students, and when they go there, beyond a point, they do not know. There is nothing which is fixed, formulated, rigid. They don't know whether a step in front will lead them here or there. Literally a step and all is sky and God. And then they have to make a leap of faith. So this is the yoga of the infinite. And at one place, again in one of his early writings, Sri Aurobindo says, in traditional yogas we are told, do so many pranayam, so many japa, this mantra, that meditation. All these are human methods. Whereas what we want is Adhyatma Yoga. And there is no human method because it's the path of the infinite. The only method is to remain open to her by whatever method we can. So this is the secret of this yoga because she is infinite. The mother of infinite radiances. With this we come to the book of love. Most beautiful 3-canto book. A real favorite because it touches upon what love is in its essence, what love has become upon earth, what is its purpose in creation, how it can yet lead us to the Supreme, and what it means to be in love. All these aspects of in our life, if there is one thing which uplifts us beyond ourselves, as the mother has said, one thing which uplifts us beyond ourselves in normal life, where people have not yet turned towards the divine, it is love. It does a magic. Even human love, for a moment, it changes everything and it makes us upward, makes everything seem beautiful because there's the nature of love. It brings the sense of beauty and joy. Of course, it's at a much lower pitch. Love turned towards the divine is something far more beautiful. But therefore, this secret will be revealed to us in the book of love. It's lovely because this is the centenary year of the mothers coming and meeting Sri Aurobindo. So we are well in terms of time. Surely this or the next darshan, August 15, we'll finish this 3 cantos. They're not very long. Canto 1, the destined meeting place. Everything has a meaning and purpose. At least when we trust the inner divine. Not when we arrange things that okay, kab milna hai, okay, we fix a time, the relatives come with the bride and with the bridegroom, with tea and all this hangama. But there is a beauty in the way the divine works. He has a touch of joy and creativity, original creativity. So that's how the divine makes people meet. But when human beings do it, they mess it up. Over a cup of tea in a very formal place. But what spot the divine chooses? But now the destined spot and hour were close. Unknowing, she had neared her nameless goal. No advertisement. Satyavan put no advertisement and Savitri also did not. Just the soul seeking. For though a dress of blind and devious chance is laid upon the work of all-wise fate, our acts interpret an omniscient force that dwells in the compelling stuff of things. What a powerful line this is. It looks like chance, fate, accident, and then we interpret good, bad, right, wrong. But there is something else which works within. Our acts interpret an omniscient force. There is something like an all-knowing guide who pushes us, which dwells in the compelling stuff of things. Look at it. It compels us, even if we do not want, it compels us leads us towards that. Reminds me of after 2 days there is of course Shivratri, Mahashivratri, and how Shiva and Sati, they meet. Sati has been told by her father, don't ever go to the north. Not North India, but north. Of course, people who start living in south just love it. So, but that apart. There is a reign of Mayavati, here is Mayapati. So, biases apart. But don't ever go to the north. Why? Because he hates Shiva. Shiva doesn't follow any of his rules, orders, norms. In fact, he loves to break them. He has made a whole hierarchy. Brahman, Kshatriya, this, that, order of... Shiva says, no, everybody is equal. The animal is equal to the gods. Gods and titans are equal. They will all sit together. He dances with Bhoot and Pisach. He wears dead animal skin, puts a snake around himself like a toy. What kind of a creature? No sense of social propriety. When somebody asks Sri Aurobindo that, many of the ashram inmates, they don't know about social manners. Sri Aurobindo says, because they are not here to learn social manners, but spiritual consciousness. Sometimes, very, some of these one-liners. So, Sati is told, don't go there, because he alone is capable of dissuading her mind, and already he has a band of fellows following him, weird kind of creatures, bullish and whatnot, and she shouldn't go. So one day she goes, sees after all nobody else but Mother Aditi. She cannot be satisfied with confines. So she goes one day, loses her way, and suddenly lands up in a strange place. And then she asks one ascetic that I have lost my way. Can you tell me which way I should turn and how to find back my home? So the ascetic says something very nice. He says, losing the way is to find the way. Again, something like path of no path. When we break free from the fixed molds of life in which we are trapped, then we are ready to receive the infinite. So here, our acts interpret an omniscient force that dwells in the compelling stuff of things, and nothing happens in the cosmic play but at its time and in its foreseen place. So the Lord is taking all responsibility of our life. Though we keep on taking it, snatching it back from Him. I am responsible for what I did. I am a sinner, I am a saint, I did this, I didn't do this. But Lord is taking entire responsibility, shifting. He says, I am ready to bear it, please pass it on to me. And He says, nothing happens in the cosmic play, but at its foreseen time, but at its time and in its foreseen place. Everything has been fixed. We have to just discover it. I remember when we came here in Pondicherry, when Yutsu got admission, our son, and we're looking for a house. Then Dr. Maheshwari said something very interesting. He says, your house is already here, you have to just discover it. So it was wonderful that we are searching for a house and he is saying something very nice. Because very often we mentally calculate things, okay, let's first buy a house. So I tell this now, whenever people say, we'll buy a house and then, come here and let's look for a house. I tell them, don't think of all this. Come here, house would be waiting, somewhere it is there, we have to discover it. So it is true of everything. To a space she came of soft and delicate air. What language! I have heard of sentimental breeze as a poetic expression. But the Lord is describing soft and delicate air. What refined senses! Even people who have children grown up in Montessori system cannot make out. Air is soft, air is hard, air is delicate, air harsh, yes, we can understand. But this kind of a feel, soft and delicate air that seemed a sanctuary of youth and joy. The feel in that place was of youthful joy. A highland world of free and green delight, where spring and summer laid together and strove in indolent and amicable debate. So they are both vying with each other. Is it spring? Is it summer? That's the impression one had. So it was probably a highland somewhere maybe around 3000 feet like Bangalore or 4000 feet like Ramgarh, where spring and summer they blend. Even in summer there is a feel of spring. There is never that kind of summer which parches. So it's a mountain place. In indolent and amicable debate, enarmed, disputing with laughter who should rule. They were not fighting but disputing with laughter. Now summer, now spring. Their expectation beat with sudden wings, as if a soul had looked out from earth's face. Suddenly one was gazing, it was a valley full of beautiful things, joy, youthfulness, flowers. And suddenly one saw butterflies coming out. Suddenly a bird coming away from, like expectation, suddenly arising in the heart, carrying with it the blush of joy. As if a soul had looked out from earth's face. This is a novel description of expectation. When we expect things to be beautiful, divine, high and pure, it's the soul that for a moment has looked out. It's not that things will be like that in the outer nature, because it goes behind and back, everything comes. The mother says when people come first time in the ashram, they find everything beautiful. The people, the dining room food, the place, the weather, everything is wonderful. But after they start living for a few days, they start complaining about dining room food, that why they are putting so much karela, why couldn't they put more vegetable, why vegetable is only on one day, why nobody's married recently, so we have no rasgullas, so on and so forth. So they and they start complaining about people. Look at these ashramites, these fellows standing on the door, they don't even know how to behave. He's asking my pass just because I'm wearing a full pant. He doesn't know that I am a long-standing devotee. And he is letting this person pass. Look at that fellow on the dining room door. He cannot contain his anger. So everything starts appearing bad. Even the weather, oh, it's so sultry, 36 degree and 37 degree. What is the reason? Mother says, because the old animal nature comes forward. First when we come with the touch of the psychic. So everything appears beautiful, and along with it comes, it brings its result of, she says, broadness and understanding in the mind, love and sweetness in the heart, strength in the vital, health and fitness in the physical. Psychic comes out and everything is wonderful. People come here and they suddenly feel that I am free of this disease, that disease, everything. But when they start living, everything comes back. She says, what is the solution to this state of affairs? She doesn't say go away or start fighting, start doing this, that. Bring out your psychic. What a simple solution. So when we start feeling everything is bad, dining room food is bad, bring out the psychic. People are rough, bring out the psychic. Weather is bad, bring out the psychic. So look at this line. As if a soul had looked out from earth's face. There is that expectation of the divine when the soul comes out. When we are going for darshan with the soul stepped out, that is the state. When the soul is in the background, oh my God, so hot, oh, such a long queue, so much to wait. Soul is in the background. This is the difference. And all that was in her felt a coming change. She suddenly begins to feel that something is going to change, as it happens when we come here for the first time. And forgetting obvious joys and common dreams, obedient to time's call, to the spirit's fate, was lifted to a beauty calm and pure that lived under the eyes of eternity. So as she comes, she feels a pure joy, calm expectation. Those dreams about regular life, they don't come, something else comes. The marvel of a new creation, the joy of participating in a new adventure. As if the master of the worlds is before us in that earthly shape. A crowd of mountainous heads assail the sky, pushing towards rival shoulders nearer heaven. The armored leaders of an iron line is guarded by the hills, strong solitary hills, that place, that sanctuary, where Satyavan lived, that's where Savitri has come. It's amazing because mother says, Sri Aurobindo, she loved the mountains. So if it was just her choice, she would have probably found the ashram in Himalayas. But the Lord loved the sea. So, they settled here. But one thing is there, in the poem, Lord has described the mountains through and through. All the beautiful mountains and everything is in the mountains. So at least He is giving us the joy of being in the mountains. A crowd of mountainous heads assailed the sky, pushing towards rival shoulders nearer heaven, the armored leaders of an iron line. Earth prostrate lay beneath their feet of stone. Below them crouched a dream of emerald woods and gleaming borders, solitary as sleep. When are we really alone? Solitary in deep sleep. So that's how she describes. He describes, pale waters ran like glimmering threads of pearl. Like, when streams with light coming, dropping, we see little glistening spots. So this water is running like pearls. A sigh was straying among happy leaves, cool perfumed with slow, pleasure burdened feet. Faint stumbling breezes faltered among flowers. Amazing, simply amazing. The white crane stood, a vivid, motionless streak, all concentrated. The white crane stands. Peacock and parrot jewel, soil and tree. It looks like Krishna's Vrindavan. The Lord has recreated here for us, or Mount Kailash, because such places I don't know whether they really exist or not. But surely He has recreated some inner vision of the Spirit before us. The doves soft moan enriched the enamored air, and fire-winged wild drakes swam in silvery pools. The male duck swam in silvery pools. Drakes, wild ducks, not just the normal, ordinary ones. And this is definitely unearthly, celestial description. Earth couched alone with her great lover heaven. Nobody is to disturb. So earth and heaven there are meeting together, and they are together in that place. Uncovered to her consorts azure eye in a luxurious ecstasy of joy. She has just laid herself before sky. To his azure eyes, he's completely uncovered himself. Uncovered to her consorts azure eye before him. In a luxurious ecstasy of joy, she squandered the love music of her notes. So everything, the breeze, the streams, everything, the whisper, the birds, the drake, the crane, the peacock. This was earth's music, the music of love. Why? Because she is with her lover. So the mood of the moment is being captured for us, because now the Lord and His eternal spouse are going to come together. Wasting the passionate pattern of her blooms and festival riot of her scents and hues, just as when lovers meet, they want to put on the best attire, the perfumes and all this. So earth also has to meet heaven. Heaven doesn't care, but she is, after all, the feminine. So she puts on the best scents, the best flowers, the best blooms. They are filling her body with perfumes of heaven. Look at every human element has been divinized, subtilized, sublimated. Is this the work of a detached ascetic Bholenath sitting detached from the whole universe? And what a touch of humanness uplifted to heaven. Actually, if this kind of a writing, at least whatever my limited reading is, little bit, this is too far, that comes in Kalidas when he describes. And some places, of course, in Ramayana, when Sita's meeting is described with Rama, and when the two are together, and suddenly all the gods are witnessing Sita and Rama have to meet. It's a beautiful moment in that Pushpa Vatika, So suddenly, Brahma notices that there are suddenly flowers blooming there which he has not created. So he asks Vishnu, what is this? They are not my creation and I see them on earth. Of course, the Divine Mother is there. So new flowers are going to bloom, new scents, new perfumes. What our spirituality was and what it has become. Just naked ascetics, mixing khichdi and rasgulla and eating together. Not even rasgulla is nishedh. All kinds of doing weird things, walking bare feet, rolling on hot sand, sign of spirituality. Look at this spirituality, world affirming, world conquering, world beautifying spirituality of ancient days. Vyasa conceived the Mahabharata with all its splendor and grandeur, sitting in a cave, because all that is inside him. And so did Valmiki, who sat under a mound, could conceive the splendor of Ramayana. So here is our Lord revealing the truth behind everything. And festival riot of her sense and use. A cry and leap and hurry was around. And her human disciples. People used to question why mother is wearing good saris. Why she has put lipstick. And she has to explain it to us mortals. Because somebody has gifted, therefore she is. And like a loving mother, she is explaining. She could have simply said, you small little creature, you please stay with your idea of spirituality in your little corner. But she has to explain all this. And how Sri Aurobindo had such an eye for beauty. At one place he speaks about how even dresses should be beautiful, can be beautiful. And then the disciple asked him, but dhoti is very inconvenient. He said dhoti is very nice. He also appreciated sari. So then the disciple says, but dhoti is very inconvenient. Say in things like battle. He says, why? The Romans conquered the world in their togas. Why can't we conquer the world in dhotis? And so many remarks of his. When mother once, of course she was experimenting without food. And with all such story, they should be put in small footnote, disclaimer. These are performed by experts, so we should not start doing it. So she was fasting for 10 days, and then Sri Aurobindo suddenly made a remark. It doesn't look that pretty. And then she gave up. Lord had such an eye, even mother had such an eye for beauty, that when people in the playground put on shorts, girls, they were very shy those days. She would suddenly catch hold of one and say, oh, your legs are so slender, so nice, so shapely. Suddenly take away. Everything, the sense of beauty. We will see further how Sri Aurobindo describes Satyavan, how everything could be beautiful. And I feel, of course, I say ashamed to acknowledge this, that he said, of all the dresses, the worst is half pant. It is a very utilitarian dress. I don't know what to do. Most of my full pants I cut into half pant before coming here, thinking that I am doing a great thing. And he made me read this later on. So now whenever full pants come, I preserve it and I have started using it. But it's okay in the playground. But how there was an eye for beauty even in dresses. It was not that the Lord was not particular about anything. So here he is revealing to us that place. A cry and leap and hurry was around, these stealthy footfalls of her chasing things, the shaggy emerald of her centaur mane, the gold and sapphire of her warmth and blaze, magician of her rapt felicities, blithe, sensuous-hearted, careless and divine. Life ran or hid in her delightful roams. The same Indian thought that conceived of Shivoham, the Sachidanand, beyond absolute all things, that same Indian thought also conceived of Krishna, the Anandamay, Tripur Sundari, the all beautiful, and even Ajanta and Ellora. We cannot imagine Buddhist arts or Konark in Orissa when we go and see it. that even at a human level there is so much beauty, even sensuousness, careless and divine. When Sri Aurobindo was asked about who are the Apsaras, Sri Aurobindo has a whole passage on Apsaras, and he greatly appreciates who were they. The heavenly, as they walk, they as if glide upon light, and they bring in those rhythms of the higher harmonies. They are not the way they are portrayed in modern conceptions, that they are some fallen beings meant to make the sages fall. No. They came actually to open the eyes of the seers to something that was missing. They were ascetics who were just, wanting. Then Apsaras were sent. Look, this fellow is climbing halfway. Make his realization full. So they would come and show him the ways of light and harmony. They were not meant for downfall, as later Puranas and certain legends have made it show. I mean, there's such beautiful things. So here was this place. Look at these lines. Blithe, sensuous hearted, careless and divine, life ran or hid in her delightful rooms, behind all brooded nature's grandiose calm. It was not making people restless and excited. There was a beauty and grandness in everything. Even sensuous feelings were there divine because they were against a background of majestic calm. Primeval peace was there, and in its bosom held undisturbed the strife of bird and beast. This is how one experiences, say in the savannas in Africa, Masai Mara jungle, where one sees the leopard kill or the cheetah kill a deer. Now, human beings are excited. We can see a little dust rush there, just like National Geographic. But actually, the actual experience there is of deep calm in the background. Nothing. It doesn't feel ki, oh, poor fellow, he is taken a gazelle. The cheetah's face is so majestically calm when he looks at human beings, so much full of innocence that you almost feel like going and caressing the cat, and you have to resist that temptation. And of course, law doesn't allow you. And of course, if you go too near, he'll make you also the food, getting a new food. But the sense of calm that pervades, it's amazing. So he's describing that the strife of bird and beast was against a background of that calm. Why they was calm? Because man, the deep-browed artificer, had not come to lay his hand on happy, inconscient things. Mother says inconscient is not that bad. It is ready to change. It's in human beings that inconscient becomes rigid. Because of the mind, it turns everything into rigidity. As such, inconscient is plastic to change. She says that it's not difficult to change the inconscient, but in human beings, it's very difficult because it takes very rigid forms, everything, and it's so, she has to struggle. She even went down while in one of the meditations into people's minds that why this mental inconscient, what is this atmosphere? And she finds it rigid, narrow, stifling. But at the end, she finds a spring which casts her. She finds there the seeds of new creation. So here man has not yet come. Thought was not there, nor the measurer, strong-eyed toil. Life had not learned its discord with its aim. So why mind came is just to, it's an evolutionary passage, but that place there is no aim as such. Life is flowing in a beautiful, majestic way. But when man comes, what happens? Masai Mara, this thing, beautiful place, lovely even still because there are vast, vast stretches of land. But then all the tribals who were really so nice, untouched with all this, they had such nice ritual that when a man had to grow up in adulthood, the sign was that whole night he has to live in a jungle alone. And he has to face the fear, danger, kill a lion, then he's adult. Not like 18 years and he gets a passport. He had to prove his adulthood. But the moment, man started going, man in the sense the man with the mental mind, mental man, mentalized man. Now, if you want a Maasai tribe fellow with Maasai dress to pose with you, he will say $100. He doesn't know what $100 means and what he'll do. Why? Because the National Geographic people have spoiled him. They pay him, not realizing that they are completely corrupting the consciousness. Now they ask for money for just posing by their side. And they use them as a specimen. This is the sad part. So man, before he comes, everything was evolving beautifully. though little bit slowly. But when man came, everything as if he came as a spoil sport in God's plan. But God uses him to intensify the journey. The mighty mother lay outstretched at ease. All was in line with her first satisfied plan, moved by a universal will of joy. What is that first plan of mother? Evolution should be a joyful process. And that Sri Aurobindo describes elsewhere in Savitri. There is a hidden bliss at the root of things. And in everything, a bliss, a joy in success, a joy in failure, a joy in victory, a joy in fall, a joy in virtue, a joy in sin. A joy is at the root of things. But in that state, that is the first plan of the mother. That there should be joy. So in nature there is joy, regardless of the strife. The gazelle is grazing, tiger comes, pounces, there is a running about, then a tiger is caught. After not even couple of minutes, they are again grazing nicely, as if nothing has happened. But if something were to happen to us, first we will worry about that tragedy before it has happened, which will probably never happen. And then we will worry for a long time, curse God, curse this, complain, all these things will happen. But in nature, everything is done with joy. So first plan of the divine was moved by universal will of joy. The trees bloomed in their green felicity, and the wild children brooded not on pain. We brood on pain. But in those places, no. There are places in India, or at least one village, I am forgetting the name, Kalahandi or some place, anyways, I may be grossly off the mark. But in that place, it's a place of snake charmers. And children grow up with that. They play with snakes, little babies. We can't imagine, we will die of fright. But they grow up with snakes and they have learned, yes, sometimes they bite, they know how to cure it. And when they have grown up, they have absolutely no fear. Even a 5-year-old can play with a cobra without fear. That sense is not there, that this is dangerous and poison, antidotes. They have these things which they use, local things. If survive, survive. If died, died. I mean, it's just a way of life. Just like an animal creation. But that's not the goal. Obviously, we have to go beyond. Recover this state of felicity, but at an intuitive level. So we have to pass through, unfortunately, the mind. At the end, reclined a stern and giant tract. So at the end of all this, he sees a giant tract of tangled depths and solemn questioning hills, peaks like a bare austerity of the soul, armored, remote, and desolately grand, like the thought-screened infinities that lie behind the rapt smile of the Almighty's dance. What a way of describing Shiva, the next 4 lines. He's dancing, that fierce dance, Tandav, destroying countless universes, creating many others with his lash, setting the retuning. Shiva's dance is to retune the cosmos. So every time we create disorder, he has to dance to retune. It's like a retuning. And behind, what is there? That high thought. And because of that thought, everything is set into order and balance. So every morning when we get up, we once again feel that the needle has been reset. Who has done it at night? Shiva has done it. Of course, we don't know it. He drinks the poison, dances, destroys what needs to be destroyed, and creates new rhythm for us to move on. That's why he is as the mother at one place says, the Lord of transformation. At one of the places he says that. Behind the rapt smile of the Almighty's dance, a matted forest had invaded heaven. So we see these lines, 4 lines which described Shiva so majestically. A matted forest had invaded heaven, as if a blue-throated ascetic peered from the stone fastness of his mountain cell, regarding the brief gladness of the day. Suddenly he comes out of his trance, Shiva, blue-throated, ascetic, and looks upon our days, troubled with little joys and griefs, dances and sets everything in order. This is the majestic vision. And these lines again remind us of the Nil Rudra Upanishad, which is nothing but a vision of Lord Shiva. It's just like that. And Sri Aurobindo compresses it in just 5-6 lines and brings Shiva face to face with us, to us. His vast extended spirit cows behind, a mighty murmur of immense retreat besieges the ear, A sad and limitless call. Why there is a touch of sadness? He looks at our days, which are full of brief gladnesses. And he suddenly brings in us the spirit of Vairagya. Not the Vairagya which is of a varied soul. Shiva doesn't like that. But a soul that has traveled through the world like Savitri, the wide world ways, seen all the possibilities, and at the end of it says, my quest is not yet over. To that soul Shiva calls. That is the true Vairagya, not the Vairagya of the very. So here we have that sad and limitless call as of a soul retiring from the world. So Shiva is the Vairagi. But he is not a Vairagi who is afraid of world. He is a Vairagi who has lived life fully. And yet he goes beyond its frame, because the splendors of the surface never say it. As Sri Aurobindo says in one of his poems, there is a need within the soul of man. The splendors of the surface never say it, for life and mind and their glory and debate are the slow prelude of a vaster theme, a preface of the epic supreme. So that limitless call is experience, that sadness which turns us away from the world, because we don't find that one face which we are looking in 1,000 faces. So how beautiful this quest is, that one divine face for which we are born. As of a soul retiring from the world, this was the scene which the ambiguous mother had chosen for her brief, felicitous hour. Ambiguous mother, where delight and danger come together. We go to forest, so lovely, so beautiful, but also there is the risk. Ambiguous mother. This world is full of these paradoxes. Therefore it's hard to say. Even divine himself, it's hard to say what is really good for us, not good for us, if we really try to understand the divine. So the ambiguous mother, very hard to interpret or put her in a slot. She had chosen this place for the meeting. Here in this solitude, far from the world, her part she began in the world's joy and strife. Here were disclosed to her the mystic codes, the lurking doors of beauty and surprise, the wings that murmur in the golden house, the temple of sweetness and the fiery ale. So here she discovers the king's palace, the courtrooms, and the prince, charming, the Mr. Right, the Mr. Everything who is waiting. Where? In a most desolate place, which somebody would call it as, my God, God forsaken. But God forsaken is the most God inhabited. So that is the place the ambiguous mother has chosen for this play. A stranger on the sorrowful roads of time. Look at Savitri's description. This girl has not known sorrow. That's what the queen will tell her. Tell Narad. That she doesn't know what sorrow is. Can't fate spare at least one soul? She is such a wonderful child, my lovely daughter. She has to meet with such a fate. So she is a stranger to sorrow. She doesn't know what sorrow is. Her life has been beautiful and blissful so far. Immortal under the yoke of death and fate. She also doesn't know sorrow because she has lived with the sense of conscious immortality. She has touched her soul, discovered that. She is full of that peace and calm of the eternal. A sacrificant of the bliss and pain of the spheres. Love, full of joy, has suddenly invaded Savitri's heart. It doesn't. You tell a person who is in love that, this will lead to this problem, that problem. No, it is not possible. How much ever? No, my love is divine. It is sanctioned by the divine. It is a soulmate. All kinds of things. Love doesn't know sorrow. It doesn't know pain. If it gets it, it sacrifices it. Everything it is willing to sacrifice for the sake of the object of love. Of course, the object of love is not somebody else, but love itself. But that one learns later. Immortal under the yoke of death and fate. Death can take away the body, but true love never dies. That's the meaning of Taj Mahal. It's not that they died and they met together, but true love transcends death. And Sri Aurobindo appreciates it when he talks about the Taj Mahal in Foundations of Indian Culture. That's a symbol of immortal love. That love does not end with death, it goes beyond the grave and the pyre. So it is immortal. Even when it is under the yoke of death and fate, fate may separate like Nal Damayanti. Still love doesn't die. Rama and Sita's love doesn't die. True love. Of course, artificial love, false love, calculated love, bargaining love, that is not love. It's only just imitation jewelry. So it will grow pale. But true love never dies. So look at the description. Is sacrificent of the bliss and pain of the spheres. It will sacrifice bliss for the sake of the beloved. Gods, they sacrifice high homes, high seats. It will sacrifice the pain for the sake of the lover. This is the beauty of love. And that love, not any ordinary love, love in the wilderness met Savitri. She is ready for that. This is the 4-line description of love. That love which knows not sorrow, which is forever young, seeker of beauty and joy. It brings the brush of joy in a human heart. And where does it meet? Of the most unlikely place. The place where one would normally feel vairagya. So this is divine's irony. That he is making the divine and his consort meet where normally one would go for vairagya. So Savitri goes to discover her beloved there and to discover a whole world of life. So such a beautiful canto, and the coming cantos we will stop here, continue tomorrow.